All right, when we talk about the distinction between Romanesque and Gothic style, it is more a matter of mood and cultural art outlook than a major shift in all artistic forms. Certainly, Henry Adams' distinction between Romanesque style as being primarily masculine in its imagery and the Gothic style as being more feminine is still very useful, though simplified generalization. The primary shift during the late medieval Gothic period was that from a static, mentally stagnant rural outlook to a more dynamic participation in the life of the past and present. The pagan philosophers Plato and Aristotle were adapted to Christian doctrine, universities were founded, towns once again grew to a fair size because of renewed trade throughout all of Europe, and scientific ideas and goods from the infidel world of Islam were accepted. After the experience of the Crusades, all Western Europe came to life once again. The center of life shifted from the rural monasteries and feudal castles to new urban centers, where a small but prosperous middle class emerged, establishing the foundations of capitalism. Money, not barter, became the universal means of exchange. Banks developed, credit was given, and loans were made. This expansion also caused a gradual breakdown in the power of the individual feudal duke and lord, and in the spiritual power of the Pope. In contrast, the power and the various royal families and their emerging nation-states grew. For example, the royal domain of France at the end of the 12th century extended only about 100 miles from Paris, and by the end of the 15th century, it included almost all of what is now known as modern France. So here is your Gothic chair. The Gothic chair has these pointed arches that we're going to see be extremely popular in Gothic architecture. We also have decorations here that are a little bit more sophisticated, and they're repeating patterns. We still have humans and people that are not realistic, but they're a little bit more defined. And we have this sort of solid structure, this wooden chair. This is the height of where Gothic architecture will get to. This is the Saint Chapelle Chapel in Paris. I mean, it is gorgeous. So compared to what we saw in the Romanesque with the simple arches, a barrel vault, we start to get these ribbed, pointed arch constructions. The idea is that these cathedrals and churches wanted to allow as much of God's light into the worship area as possible. They wanted people to walk in and just feel the awesome power of God. And so therefore, churches became the primary artistic architectural expression. There's a pretty fantastic book series called Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. It was also made into a television series. And that really deals with the drive of people to overcome some of the engineering and structural difficulties that it takes to build buildings this size while still allowing as much light and air into the building as possible. So there were many mishaps in the building of these Gothic structures when an engineering mistake was made, or a mathematical mistake was made, or people tried something that just didn't work, because in order to have this much open space to put glass in, you needed to really have the math and tensile strength down properly. So that's what makes this chapel in particular just really beautiful, because it's just a tracery of open windows. It's also painted to a meticulous detail, all these colors. It's just really just a riot to the eye. It's almost too much, but it seems to work in a really beautiful way. When I was there in undergrad studying away, again, which you should all do, I was just flabbergasted at how beautiful it was, even though it felt a little gaudy. This is what the decoration looks like on this more intricate vaulting system that I'm going to talk about in a little bit. But you can really see no longer are we doing just groin vaults. Now we have all of these ribs coming together, and every single one of those ribs is decorated in a gorgeous way. We're also seeing the fleur-de-lis as one of the primary symbols of the French lords. We see like every column is decorated in color, painted. The columns are no longer really sticking to any particular order. They're now, or Greek order or Roman order. They're sort of whatever symbols. Some of these look a little bit more like crowns are useful to the Lord at the time. So with pointed arch, you still have groins, but now we start to see a rib vault. And so that's what we were just looking at. Let me back this up a little bit for you. So that's a rib vault. So here we are. We've got these diagonal ribs. This allows not only for this sort of solid, here's these brick pointed arches meeting together, but this allows for more space and different sizes to come together in specific ways. And it has a more grand, beautiful look to it. It's also got different structural capacities. So this is the complex rib vault. Words. We also have more illuminated manuscripts. So in particular, there's a prayer book depicting rural life called the Book of Hours. It's where we've got a lot of information about what life was day to day. You can also see in the background there is what we think of as castles, which are castles. But castles at this period of time, of course, were only owned by the very, very wealthy. They were strongholds. They were useful. They weren't just for looks. They were to defend when things got bad, and all of the peasants would run behind the main wall of the castle complex to weather whatever pillaging might happen in this time period. Peasant clothing was plain and serviceable. Men wore a homespun tunic, belted at the waist with stockings for cold weather and a cloak. Women wore a gown with a close-fitting bodice and a skirt with moderate fullness. The court of Burgundy was particularly notable for luxurious dress. So here we start to see how clothing mirrors architecture. So we start to see this sort of pointed hat. So as the arches become pointed and we start to get steeples on buildings, women are also sort of putting steeples on their heads. So this is one of those zeitgeist things where all of the sort of aesthetic motifs sort of come together. And so what we see in the Burgundy court is this really full skirt. And we also see, these hose that are now elaborately decorated, sometimes one leg and another leg being different. Asymmetry was in clothing. But we also have richly brocaded fabrics. We have wide sleeves. It really just depends. So here is a medieval Burgundian costume from 1450. We also have a lot of head wrappings on women, these sort of what will become wimples on nuns, as we were talking about. We have fur-lined cuffs. Here's some of the fantastic hats of the period. Just take it in. Fantastic hats, 15th century France. Unmarried girls, brides, and queens at their coronation could bear their heads. Anyone else needed to cover their hair. Hence, fabulous hats. In 15th century France, here's some more hats. Yes, hats. Here's sort of a progression of the 14th to 15th century. Again, different regions, different costumes. This is upper class men and women. Here we are in the 16th century. We're going to get into this a little bit more as we talk about the Renaissance specifically, especially this period, because this is where we really are starting to see elaborate sewing, bodices, and artificial silhouettes. So remember we were talking about artificial silhouettes in the first day. This pumpkin pants, artificial silhouette. We're starting to see it here, artificial silhouette. Especially, you know, the wide sleeves could also be slightly considered artificial silhouette, but that's really a little bit on the cusp. But here in the late 16th century, we really start to see artificial silhouettes. So the pointed hat we were talking about is called a hennin. Princesses were allowed the tallest hennins. Noble ladies could have one no longer than 24 inches, and this is again in the Burgundy court. Livery. So this is where we start to see special uniforms for servants. This period is also included officials of the court and ladies in waiting. Livery is garments with special devices or symbols associated with noble or his family, sewn into multiple colors, or it could be party colored, which would be, having a division, like we saw earlier on, with one leg being striped and the other leg being solid. Maybe the stripes then are on the tabard, on the upper opposite side, the stripes are on the leg, that kind of thing. So here we are. We see some 12th to 15th century livery. We see one side of the body being a different color than the other. This starts to get more and more elaborate as we get into the 15th century. We start getting sleeves that are really carefully sewn and draped in a specific way. We also start to get slashes in these outfits to show the under tunic. We also start to see, so this is a little bit of this party colored, like partitioned. It's essentially partitions of color, especially in this one. So we're seeing all the different lords that this person serves, and or it's often the different families that have come together and intermarried, and so now we're going to make that visible on the crest that this family is tied with others, or this person was descended from multiple people. This is a pourpoint doublet. So the hose would be attached to the underside of this. We're also seeing some fantastic buttoning, right? Buttoning. Here are sort of how the hose, right, would be attached. You would have some kind of undergarment with the short pants, and then you would be able to tie those up into your doublet. Here are here's a coif. It's just a way to cover your head very simply. So this, and I'm having trouble. So here's these pourpoint hose. So here you can also see the attachment to his shirt, right, to hold them up. Sort of like before suspenders, sort of a vest of suspenders. The pregnancy look was very in. So you can see that she's got a lot of fabric gathered around the front of her body. This was, one of women's main duties was to have children and go forth and be fruitful. And so this comes through in fashion. We start to see that women, like even before they're married, they want to show that they're fertile and that they are attractive because they can have children. And so we see these dresses that are created, even if you're not pregnant, to look as if you are. And we see that this hose and doublet combination really start to become formalized into the common dress of nobility. There's also be like calf decorations. This is where calves on men are really sort of attractive. Women wearing a I always say this wrong, Hoppeland, with dagged sleeves. So dagged sleeves, so sleeves start to get a little out of control in certain areas. So you can see how long these sleeves are, but they would also be dagged. So this is like where they would decorate or, feather them in some decorative way off the arm, right? But you can see this sort of like beautiful line. Again, you can only do this if you are noble, because you would get caught on everything or get muddy and gross. So you have to be in a area where this dress is when it drags, it's going to drag against some kind of smooth stone, not rough stone or mud or anything. Here's the tippet sleeve. So we talked about this a little earlier. Before they were sort of attached, then they become sort of part of the overall sleeve itself. So this is a tippet, and this hangs down like this. And the dagged hood, right? So again, we're cutting out pieces of that. That's dagging. In this case, it's scalloped. We also have different kinds of women's bodices. So this is a tippet sleeve, and then we have all these different stomachers. So stomachers are added as a way to cover up where the bodice comes together. So the stomacher is over your stomach, so it's right here, right? This thing right here. So with royal women's clothing, there would be a gown fitting smoothly through the body with tight-fitting long sleeves. There would be a surcoat that would be sideless with low décolletage. So décolletage being your chest. There would be a stiffened placard extended to the hip where it joined a wide band encircling the hips to where the skirt was attached. The skirt was so long and so full that it had to be lifted when walking, and a vertical line of decorative brooches was placed at the front of the placards. That's that stomacher we were talking about. Different terms for everything. So here we have that stomacher again. You can see it being pulled together, and then with a decorative item where the stomacher, the placard is. Here's a historically accurate Sleeping Beauty from the time period. For fun. In the late 15th century, so now we've really embraced the hose going into the jerkin, but we also, men start to decorate their genitals because they have to have a way to do their daily business, right? And so they would have a codpiece, which would be easily removed so that they could go to the bathroom, and then, even though there weren't really bathrooms, and then they would be able to close that up again. This was a way also not to see through to the undershorts. It would be some way to cover the area. This became quite elaborate and decorative over time in different areas. Now, of course, this is personal preference, rank, all of these things. You can also see they have fanny packs. Fanny packs. Okay, they're not called fanny packs, but you get the idea. So here again are these cod pieces. So with the technology, the spinning wheel is created. So now it's much, much easier to create yarn for all classes, also finer yarn than had been previously made. Tailors underwent a lengthy apprenticeship, and craftsmen specialized. So tailors made garments, lingerie makers made wimples and veils, and bootmakers and shoemakers started making more and more complicated shoes. The word lingerie derives from French, the making of a linen cloth, actually. It's just that much of the undergarments of the time were made of linen because linen feels good against the body, unlike a lot of the other fabrics that could be made. So I'm just referencing this arch item. We're going to be moving through time. So this is sort of Romanesque, right, with the keystone, We have the stilted through Romanesque arch, and now we're getting into this pointed two-centered arch. So that's what we've been seeing thus far. Sorry for the slide. I had meant to break this out a little bit. Go ahead and read through this. I won't read it all to you. But we will be picking up on Tuesday and watching a documentary on the building of Gothic architecture, specifically cathedrals. There are some videos in this week's lessons that have to do with pilgrimages, because part of the reason why people were building these cathedrals was to house relics of saints, so that the towns would continue to prosper. So more people would come to town to see relics in a church, and the more grand the church was, the more of a draw it would be for that town, and therefore the more prosperous these towns would be. And so the building of these cathedrals and this Gothic structure was extremely important to the people who lived in this time. And then Gothic architecture continues to inspire us today. It has a little bit of a stately, romantic sort of feeling to it. And so there are a lot of skyscrapers built in Chicago in the early 20th century that had a Gothic flair. Not just Chicago, but all around the world. I was thinking back to Chicago. So Gothic architecture has a huge influence as one of the great styles. And so we'll spend a little bit more time watching that in video rather than me telling you about it twice.